Well, hello everybody. A little bit of change of scenery. I'm in Muncie today, but I'm doing a lecture on the Capstone. This would be for discussion number 5, and it includes information from chapter 5 and 6. So important considerations in legal research. Okay, so this is what we're going to be talking about. Something always to consider in legal research is something I learned in about 5th grade, and I think it could be helpful to anybody, and it was really intended for journalism, but it can be useful to just about anybody. When you start trying to investigate a subject of some kind, anything, but particularly in a legal subject, you want to answer these questions. And you know, it's the basic 5 questions, okay? And you know, it's called the 5 W's, or the 4 W's and H, okay? I'll get it right here in a minute. Okay, so here again, very important to consider this. And of course, who are we talking about when we say who? We're talking about the parties, you know. But getting down more into brass tacks, you know, who is right, you know, who is wrong, you know. And what you're getting into there is, you know, what's your basis for arguing in favor of a plaintiff? Well, just because someone came to you and said, you've got to help me, I was hurt in an accident. You know, is there any legal theory where you can say, well, you are the victim in this case? You know, people rush to the courthouse all the time. I used to see it a lot in criminal court and claim to be the victim when they're not really the victim. They're the wrongdoer. You can see this in a bar. Somebody comes into a bar, they get to arguing. My favorite story is arguing over the pool table. That's my quarter, no, that's my quarter. Next thing you know, one of them takes a swing at the other one, misses. The other guy hits him with a pool cue, knocks him out. Who's the victim? It was it self-defense or, you know, just what? You know, very confusing fact situation for as simple as it is. What? Okay, what kind of case is it? Is it a negligence case? What are the elements of negligence? You know, is it a criminal case? What are the elements of that crime that you think the person might have committed? You know, these are all important things. When? The date is critically important. Why? Because of what we call the statute of limitations. Statute of limitations, which also stands for something else if it's wrong. I've had people actually say that something happened on a such date, and it was a year before, and they're out of luck, they're burned. Most crimes have a statute of limitation. Murder does not, but most of them do. And they're usually the equivalent of the maximum sentence that you can get for that crime. Where is also important. Why would where be important? What jurisdiction? Okay? What's the right jurisdiction? Okay? Where did this happen? Or where does the defendant live? So where is critically important. How? How did this accident happen? How did it happen? These are all important factors to consider. So as you're setting this up, you know, we've got to think about these. Well, I want to go back and spend a little bit, you know, on some of these a little bit more, develop them a little more. Well, one of the things in your book that they talk about is, what is this? You know, is this a federal case? Is it that big of a case? Does it involve federal law? Is it a civil rights case? You know, what is it? What kind of case is it? Is this a state case, meaning it would be tried in a county level state court? Or is it a local matter, which could be handled in a city court? And you know, that's always a question. You need to answer that question. You need to ask yourself where when you start to do this research. Very critically important. And also, what else comes into play on this is what procedure should you follow? Is it state procedure? Is it federal procedure? These are all questions that need to be answered. What are the rules of evidence in this type of case? Are there any cases on point that kind of fit your facts almost perfectly? So legal research, critically important, and one of the first things that you have to address. And so if you could just remember those basic rules, who, what, when, where, how, then this would be pretty profound in terms of something that could help you along the way. Now, one of the things I would say to you is, people say, well, I'm not very good at legal research. Well, my question for them is, how often do you do it? You know, if you're just like, well, I'm not very good at it, well, because I never do it. It's like writing. I'm not a very good writer. Well, the more you write, the better you get. The more research you do, the better you get at it. It's practice, practice, practice. Everything in this course is about practice. You guys get on the discussion board and you say, well, I didn't do very good on this quiz. Well, how much preparation did you do before you took the quiz? Good question. So, important places to look for law. Mandatory laws, for example. There are different legal systems. There are 50 different state systems, and believe me, there is no rhyme or reason. Even between Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Kentucky, you're going to see substantial changes in different state laws. I love to tell the story about marijuana. When I was working in Ohio, they came out with a law in the middle 1970s that said, we're going to downgrade all these marijuana offenses. You know, this was in 1975. They had guys sitting in prison for pretty small offenses involving marijuana. So my job as a public defender was to sit and talk to all the family members that came in our doors and said, Johnny's in prison in Mansfield for possession of marijuana. I read in the paper that you might be able to help him. Well, just sign these papers or take him over to the prison, have him sign them, bring them back to me, and then I'll file them with the court. Automatically, bam, they go from being in prison for, say, 5 years to being on probation overnight, you know. Indiana, same thing. It's like 4 years, you know, for some pretty minor offenses, especially if it's your second marijuana offense. That would be a fine in Ohio. It's a felony in Indiana. So it just shows you the differences. There's only one federal system that has its advantages. It kind of supersedes states, certain kind of cases like civil rights and so forth. And then it says there's an indeterminate number of local systems. One of the bad things about a lot of these local systems, I've been in like Bluffton and some of these small town courts. I was in like Sharpsburg, Indiana, which is over by Tipton, and I went in there on a DUI one time, and the actual floor of the town court had collapsed. So literally, they were holding court in a room where I come walking in, and it's like this. It's just like I'm at an angle like this. Everything is conducted that you're kind of like 1 foot on the curb, 1 foot in the gutter, you know. I mean, it was just amazing how poor, you know, can that town be, you know. So, and this goes along with the laws too. They just do some colloquial things. The guy in Bluffton, he didn't like rich people. So I was representing a lady that had a really high-powered job, got lost in town, ran a stop sign, and that's like the crime of the century. He wants to fine her $500 for running a stop sign. So I filed an appeal and said, you know, what's the appeal bond? $500. Okay, well, here's $500. We'll go across the street. and end up trying it in the county court where they threw the whole thing out and just let her, make a donation to the YMCA, like 50 bucks or something. So different local systems do different things. They're supposed to follow rules, they're supposed to follow regulations, but you get out so far from the center of the power in the state that they just do their own thing, whatever that might be. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. So sometimes researching may involve going and looking in a book. Sometimes you may ask around some older lawyers in town or other paralegals that have worked a lot in different places and say, what's the rules? What's the local rules in like Wabash? What's the local rules in Shelbyville? They have their own little fine points of, how to do things, especially in places like their city courts. So you got to check that out, but it's not a formal system of rules and laws where you could easily find it like in a book somewhere. Okay, so let's move forward here a little bit, see what else we can get into. As we said, the main thing, I can come to you and say, one little short video that says, practice, practice, practice. You can't ever get enough practice, okay? Well, substantive law. What is substantive law? Well, substantive law basically springs from the U.S. Constitution. So it's a Constitution, it's statutes, these can be federal or state. It's also what we call common law. And common law can also be stated as what we call case law, okay? And what that says is, hey, they dealt with this problem before, and so, here's a case on it, and that is a big place to look. And a lot of times, if you start out by using an encyclopedia or annotated state code, like the West Annotated State Code, you can get a lot of information just by looking in the footnotes at the end of the different statutes. They have annotations in there that have interpreted the different statutes. So common law is, basic things. Maybe there won't be any statutes on it, but some others might say, well, there's a statute on a book that did away with the common law, and this is what the law is now. Also important to check executive orders. Okay? In some areas, the governor, the president, the mayor, they have a certain amount of authority, and so they can change things. Same way with these small town councils and so forth, if you're doing something in city court. And sometimes those things aren't legal. They may think so, but they're really not. And there's a direct conflict with state statute. So those are ways to undermine what they're doing in some of these small communities. Very good example. My son's driving down the road going 55 miles an hour. There's no speed limit signs anywhere around. Cop pulls him over. This happens to be in Ohio. Says, hey, you're speeding. You're going 20 miles over the speed limit, which is like really bad, And so, he's like, well, I didn't see any speed limit signs, officer. She said, speed limit's 35. Well, I went over there because it's my son. I would invest the time. I did this for just about anybody, but really dug in deep when it involved my son, because I was going to have to pay the fines and everything anyway. Well, come to find out, the city limits are in the center line of the street. And so the side that he was driving on was the west side, which is outside the city limits. Speed limit 55. He's going 55. Left side of the street is inside the city limits, speed limit 35. So the police officer was incorrect in writing that ticket to my son because he overcharged him. The speed limit was not 35, it was 55. So case dismissed, out it goes. There you go. So probably saved myself $1,000. All right. So that's the kind of stuff that you can get into that they can set these speed limits, but they're not valid. So you have to be careful. Just because a cop tells you something on a curbstone, it doesn't make it right. There's federal procedures and there are state procedures. As we've looked at in civil procedure, there's a whole set of federal procedures and they're sometimes in conflict, but most of the time they're pretty generally in agreement with the states and their rules, because the driving force between a lot of these states and federal government in terms of rules has to do with the Constitution. For example, the 14th Amendment. You cannot set up a rule that would conflict with the 14th Amendment. Just for example, there are criminal rules, there are appellate rules, there are also rules of evidence, and there are local court rules, like I said earlier. So you need to familiarize yourself with all these things. You're not a lawyer, so don't get overwhelmed by it, but you do need to have some passing familiarity with all these. If there was anything that I felt like we didn't spend enough time on as far as learning, it's evidence. We are adding a course in the rules of evidence, but that's probably going to be a little bit too late for most of you. But if I would say if you're going to spend some time on something more so than others, I would look at the rules of evidence more carefully. Primary law is recorded. The Constitution, of course, is what we call an organic document. Organic. And what does that mean, organic? If you buy an egg, a chicken egg that's organic, what do you mean? Well, it's part of the substrata system. It's interlaced with everything that we do. The Constitution is tied in with everything, or it should be. If it's not, there's a problem, and that's where a lot of times we find that there are issues. Well, after the Constitution is a basic place to look, statutes, bills, slip laws, session laws, codified rules or codified laws. The federal has official statutes, which is short term is STAT period, which are chronological. The United States Code, which is USC, is topical. So you want to look for crim, for example, that's under one topic. You want to look for civil rights, that would be under like 42, for example. I think crim is like 17. There's a lot of unofficial, and what these are is they can be encyclopedia opinions by attorneys general. They can be experts that are recognized in the field that might write what we call a treatise on something. There's also additional administrative rules and regulations, and they a lot of times can be separately codified. Those are known in the federal system as CFRs. Indiana has administrative rules too, so you probably want to check those as well. Case law is also very important, and it's probably one of my favorite things because you really need to read a few cases. Even if you see, well, this is controlled by statute. Well, how does that statute get applied? It's applied by the cases, okay? It's like, well, what does the Constitution mean? Well, it means what the United States Supreme Court says it means. Same way, statutes mean what the state Supreme Court says it says, okay? So, very important. So this is important to look at is cases because, and these are all appellate cases. Trial court cases are not good law, okay? They can be wrong. The better cases are shepherdized appellate level cases. So when you're doing this kind of work, you find a good case that's interpreting a statute, you want to shepherdize it to make sure that that's a really good example of what is done in this situation. So legal research, vitally important in every case. reported cases, they have a caption just like a complaint does. They have dates, which here again is important, might be superseded by new laws, so you got to check those dates. There are parallel citations, head notes, there are statements of facts, there's opinions, there's the holding, rationale, there's dicta, which can be side notes and stuff, and you've got to be careful not to get off on a tangent on some kind of dicta. And then there's a final decision, usually relatively short, which is kind of like the conclusion that says yay or nay. Federal case reporters, generally what you're looking at is U.S., that's the official, and that's pretty much where I'm going to leave it on that. I wouldn't look too many other places. You do want to shepherdize those U.S. cases, so it'd be like 222 U.S. 101, and then the year, like let's say 1941. That's a good citation for that case. Same way on lower courts, that would be Federal Reporter, and there's Federal Reporter third now. Most of my career there was a Federal second, and those are still good cases, some of them. And then there's another one called Fed Sup, which is F period, S-U-P-P period, which is some local cases that interpret situations applying higher level cases. And so, you know, this is very good to look at. There's also what we call federal rules decisions that go into civil procedure, how's it to be applied, and also the Bankruptcy Reporter. State cases are divided up all over the country. Our reporter is Northeast 2nd, and that's shown like this. And so you want to always have the Northeast Reporter for our cases. There's also Atlantic Reporter for cases out east. Most of the things we do, you want to use a Northeast 2nd citation to an Indiana case. If it's a case of first impression, try to find a case that's at least in the Midwest. So look at Ohio, look at Illinois. That can get you into trouble sometimes because there are significant differences between Indiana and Ohio in some areas, as well as Indiana and Illinois in other areas. So these are important, but you know, they're kind of secondary. Try to stick to Northeast 2nd if you can, as far as Indiana cases. Other cases out there, Northwestern, which is Michigan and Pacific, Southeast, Southwest, Southern Reporter. You can look in your blue book to get more details on this, or in your review book, page 265. Other secondary law that we talked about earlier is a lot of legal encyclopedias, and that's important. Look at Corpus Juris Secundum or Amjur, second series, American Law Reports, or the treatises I mentioned earlier, restatements, and dictionaries. So very important. I would say always start there. Start with an encyclopedia first to just get a basic handle on the problem that you're trying to solve, and then work out from that, because what you'll get in like an ALR or Amjur article is some key words and definitions of those key words. Then you can go back and push those key words in under Indiana, for example, because the words generally pretty much the same everywhere, but the interpretation can be very different. Tell you one thing, on computers have superseded just about everything we do. When I started out, you had a pack of little 5x7 cards or 3x5 cards, and you just went in the library and just went from book to book and wrote down the facts on one side, the citation on another, and just worked your way through the whole library. And it was a lot of handwork. It was very difficult. Now, in a matter of minutes, you can find sources on computers, but sometimes you got to be careful, because here once again you can get in too much of a hurry, skim through something, think you understand it, and then forget to shepherdize it, for example, and it's out of date, you know, and it hasn't been updated in the computer yet. One of the things that I found is there's these pocket parts, like end shepherds in the old days, and you had to look at those very carefully back when there was no internet. And now it's basically there too, but you've got to be very careful to make sure everything is like up to date. So that would be one cautionary note. Now, one thing to look at too is your citation. Sometimes when you're writing a brief or something like that, you have to be good on your form of citation. The Harvard Blue Book is the standard to use in terms of citing cases or laws. So my advice, if you don't have one already, you should have a Harvard Blue Book. They are available in the bookstore, or you can get them online. A lot of times you can get a few pages online for free, but I wouldn't depend on that. I think if you're going to work in this field, you ought to have your own copy of a Harvard Blue Book. It's kind of funny, but when I started, the thing was about a third as it is big now, and it was white. It was called the Harvard White Book, but they changed it over, added a lot of content, and made it blue. Important thing is, once again, go back to those things that I told you about, the 4 W's and H. And, you know, it's set up an outline along those lines, and just try to answer all those questions that are under, you know, the W for who, and the W for what, and so forth. And that's a good way to organize it. Very simple. And then go down through, and then when you get answers to those things, you need to brief the cases that pertain to your case that are most like it. Sometimes issues like the factual issues, very similar, so then the outcomes are going to be very important. So basically that's our discussion that we have today, a little bit of a video lecture. Look it over. You can comment, you know, under my post on the discussion board. Like I said, the simplest, shortest answer is that you need to do a lot of practice. Work, work, work. Do some more research. And just do it on silly things. You know, like you'll pick something up in the newspaper and they'll claim that something's true. Well, you don't want to accept what they say in the newspaper. Go look it up for yourself. You know, you can get it on the news, especially go to Fox News. You know, 90% of the time it's all lies. So basically you've got to think for yourself, do your own research, look things up, and please yourself as far as what you think is true or not true. Well, that's going to be it for today. We will hit a couple other quick points on another PowerPoint real quick here, and then basically that's going to be it for today. But give me just a second. I've got to run over here and change something real quick, and then we'll finish up with just, I think this one just has one slide. So basically we'll talk about preparation for your test in the chapter 6. Basically the author and people that have created this course said very important to make some flashcards, just like what I said, 3x5 or 5x7, black Sharpie pen, and then write down, and then look at page 310 to 322 in your course book and get the Latin terms and get the definition. So you might want to put the term on one side, the definition on the other. So if you've got a friend that's helping you, which would be good, I used to do this all the time with my wife, is she reads the Latin term, you try to memorize the definition, or she reads the definition, you try to memorize the Latin term. So if you see what I'm saying, if you flip them over, you just let you look at one side, your friend looks at the other side, and then so share it. So that's what we call flashcards. Somebody pulls up a flashcard, it may say res ipsa loquitur. What is res ipsa loquitur? Well, you figure it out and put that on the other side of the card and then memorize it, okay? Another set of these cards you need to do are what we call legal terms, and they are on pages 322 to 338. So hey, basically that's it for today on this lecture that I did for you. Take time, look it over. Mainly, it just takes a lot of work, a lot of practice, and a lot of studying on your part to be ready for this test. So that's it for now. We'll be back with you with another presentation soon.